Please welcome from the United Kingdom, news anchor, BBC World, Adnan Nawaz.
Thank you very much. Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, people from the international business community, Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. I am indeed Adnan Nawaz. So this session is about the diversification imperative for the Egyptian economy. We'll look at some examples from other emerging economies as well. And just before I introduce the distinguished panel to you, let me just read you a little excerpt from the Al Hayat Pan-Arab newspaper. It's an article from about 15, 16 months ago, written by a gentleman called Lasenachi. He wrote, "Economic diversification leads to a reduction in growth fluctuations, which encourages private investment in the various sectors of the economy. Fluctuation of growth in Arab countries is higher than the rest of the world. Economic diversification is considered essential for job creation, especially in light of the rapidly increasing numbers of entrants to the job market. We know about the high figures of youth unemployment in Egypt. Countries cannot continue to rely on the public sector, the largest employer in many Arab countries, to reduce unemployment rates." And just finally, diversification in manufacturing and high value-added services creates opportunities for exporting new products instead of just ramping up exports of the same products. The diversification of exports requires integration into the global economy that aims to foster long-term growth. Very obvious things, but when you read it in black and white, it becomes something that you think that you can't afford to ignore. Of course, there are other sessions going on in parallel to what's happening here on stage at the moment. So if you feel as if you want to come forward and take some seats closer to the stage, please do so. If you have any questions for the panel, you can send them to @EgyptTheFuture. That's at EgyptTheFuture.com, in fact, and then they'll appear on this tablet that I've got with me. Okay, let's introduce the panel. Sitting next to me, Ken Allen, Global CEO, DHL Express. Ken started with DHL as the Middle East Regional Manager, and as Global CEO of the company, he's reversed its performances. It was just 5 years ago that a survey of 133 German companies named Ken as Germany's #1 turnaround manager. Not everybody here is called Ken, but there is another Ken. Ken Jacobs is chairman of Lazard, the financial services organization. Ken has served as a managing director of Lazard since 1991. He's been chairman of the board of directors and CEO since 2009. Okay, next to Ken, Ahmed Abdul Karim Jolfar, Group CEO of Etisalat. The Etisalat Group operates in 19 markets in the Middle East, Africa, and Asia. It has between 170 to 180 million subscribers, and they all have your phone number, right? Liu Hao is here, CEO of the China-Africa Development Fund. Before moving to the CAD recently, Mr. Liu was the governor of the Hong Kong branch of the China Development Bank. Since 1994, his focus has been on international affairs. And finally, we have Sir Martin Sorrell. Sir Martin is CEO of WPP. He's also the founder of the company. And WPP is the world's largest marketing communications group. It employs more than 179,000 people in over 3,000 offices in 111 countries, like the United Nations, Martin.
Sort of.
Okay, let's start with what the panel believe is simply the definition of diversification. And Sir Martin, let me start with you. What do you believe it actually is? Because could it be opening new industries and sectors, or could it be actually just opening up existing sectors to increased competition?
Well, I think the honest answer is the both. Let me just sort of turn it a bit, because I think actually your opening quote defined it very well. It's capitalizing on the resources, the indigenous resources of the country you're talking about. It's extending those as broadly and deeply, both internally, regionally, and internationally as you can. But as just thinking about what you were saying whilst you were reading out that quote, it struck me there's a very neat comparison between the macro and the micro. So at the macro level, like you have here in Egypt, obviously a significant change in direction by the government here, encouragement of FDI, inward investment, development of industries here, export, and the like, that's one thing. But just think about your average, if there is an average Egyptian entrepreneur. In terms of native entrepreneurs, indigenous entrepreneurs competing, it seems to me, if you look at the history in other nations, whether it would be a Hong Kong, a South Korea with the chaebols, the Japanese keiretsus, Argentinian companies, Chilean companies, Brazilian companies, what they tended to do is to broaden and horizontalize their activities into many different activities, certainly in the early stages of economic growth. So if you think about the government role, the government's role, I think, should be obviously to capitalize on existing resources like energy and tourism here in Egypt, which would be obvious examples, but also to stimulate the growth of all industries, particularly to deal with the youth unemployment issue. I mean, one of the things that struck me about this conference so far is that the youth element is probably a little bit underemphasized. I mean, two elements. One, the female element, and the other, the youth element. And female employment and youth employment. I mean, if the level of unemployment in Egypt is 13%, which I read that it is, that means that the youth unemployment is usually running at about twice that level. So in order to deal with that unemployment issue, and politically, obviously, that's a hot button as well, you have to stimulate, I think, industries across the board. But I do think there's a neat fix between entrepreneurial talent in a 90 million plus population like Egypt and the needs for government to stimulate industries across the board.
Okay, you've raised so many issues there. We will talk about, hopefully, all of them. Entrepreneurs, individuals, small, medium-sized enterprises, the role of government that you're particularly stressing. And yet, Ken Jacobs, you work for a very private company, and in open markets, the idea of neoliberals at least, which is the accepted form of the world economy at the moment, the idea is that it should be the private sector that drives diversification, that drives the entire economy. So what does the Egyptian government have to do to encourage the private sector to take the reins and do that driving forward?
I think the evidence in the developed world is or the approach in the developed world is to drift towards or steer towards the neoliberal approach, which is free markets define. And what matters in that is really that the markets do a good job of allocating capital. But in emerging or developing economies, the evidence is probably more mixed or more ambiguous. And the key thing in most developing economies is the allocation, the capital allocation decisions around your basic infrastructure. And there you have hard infrastructure and soft infrastructure. Hard infrastructure is roads, bridges, transportation, ports, your choice of energy, your primary choice of energy, electricity, telecommunications. Those are the traditional things there. And in each one of those, government has to play an important role. It has to make decisions about, okay, which of the energy sources are going to be our primary energy sources? How are we going to drive and develop electricity? How are we going to deal with the hard infrastructure of roads and tunnels and the permitting and such? And what are some of the basic decisions we make about allocating opportunity around telecom? And then on soft infrastructure, there government plays an incredibly important role. Number one, it sets the governance. Courts, decision-making, rule-making, transparency, all the things which are fundamental to really getting outside investment. And it also makes decisions around education, which is critical for developing economies, and importantly around things like healthcare, and also very importantly, financial markets.
Okay, let's pick up on the point of the government having to create that sort of exoskeleton, if you like, that can then be filled by the private sector. Ahmed Abdul Karim, you work for Etisalat that must, I presume, already be doing business in Egypt. How do you find the current environment here for your projects?
Adnan, Egypt has been one of the most successful venture for Etisalat in the region. We operate in 19 countries, and we launched our services in 2006, and has been successful since the beginning. We have invested a total of 36 billion Egyptian pound. Today, Egypt, what need, I think, is to reform in the policies and the regulation of the telecom sector. In Egypt, you have very limited spectrum for mobile communication. So the government has to do something to make available a huge spectrum for mobile communication so that mobile broadband become a basic right for every Egyptian in the country. And when we speak about mobile broadband, it's not the 1 MB and 2 MB anymore. It is the 25 MB and beyond. The second thing is the fiber infrastructure in the country. Today, there is limited fiber investment in Egypt. I think the government, what they have to do, they have already started probably 2 years back with a comprehensive ICT strategy, which now require somebody to really take it and implement it on the ground. If that is implemented, it's going to position Egypt as the digital hub in the region, because you have the resources, you have the investor appetite, you have the youth, more than 60% of the people under 30 years old or under 25, and you have the innovative culture in Egypt, or let's say the innovative Egyptians, which have been successful in many other markets, but in Egypt because the environment is not yet the right environment.
So in fact, it seems what you're saying is just by improving connections between people through telecommunications, that helps diversification because businesses are able to be in touch with their customers so much more easily, I suppose, right?
Yes, just to add one more point, the telecom sector itself today is, I would say, ripe for diversification, but it is also at the same time enabler to diversify other economies.
Mr. Liu, China in the past few years has become so well known in Africa through its huge investments right across the continent, north to south, east to west. Tell us how the CAD fund is helping improve diversification specifically here in this country.
Okay, thank you. Assalamu alaikum. And I think in the past 8 years, China Development Fund has extended our capital injection into 34 countries in the 81 or 82 projects. And for the economic return, someone is good, someone is not good. But the most important things, you've been this continent or not. You've been here, that means you have the context and the knowledge about them. Especially, you should know this continent, just like in Egypt. I've been here 2009 for the representative office for our bank. Stayed here for 4 months. I know them a little, but this is my 3rd time here, my 2nd time to Sharm el-Sheikh. I just want to say, no matter what kind of industry the government developed, it should relate to 2 things. One is the country's overall planning, what the country needed. The second is what the young people needed. When I do the business in Africa, I normally talk to the government, what the government really want to develop, and what this kind of develop can generate, what kind of influence and synergy to the people, especially to the young people. For example, we have injected a project in the SC zone, just a very small area, 1.3 kilometers, but 34 Chinese enterprises there, and solve the employment more than 1,000. It's not big, but it all depends whether we done or not.
Can you give us some specific examples of business projects that you're working on here in Egypt at the moment?
Okay, great. I just mentioned the SE Zone. This is the governmental corporation one, but at the early beginning, it's just a concept. We need this kind of zone to absorb and attract more Chinese entrepreneurs come here. After 6 years passed, the people know the zone, and the Chinese guys know how to do the business in Egypt. This is a very good experience. The second is they never know this kind of concept, how to develop. But now we are not just the phase one. We are trying to do the phase two. Will be announced the next month.
Okay, so we've heard about diversification from different viewpoints and different industries. Let's get Ken Allen's take on this, because Ken, your take is a little bit different in that you already feel Egypt, is diversified enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think diversification by definition is risky and also costly. And, that's the reason why in business so many acquisitions are not accretive. It's very difficult to merge cultures and IT systems and things like that. So I think from what we've heard over the last couple of days, there's huge opportunities in Egypt already. The Minister of Finance said this morning, the list is infinite. So I think what we need to be doing in Egypt, and what I've done in a lot of turnarounds, right, is bring that focus, right? The focus back onto what are we really good at, and then what can we build? And maybe when we look at diversification, there's vertical diversification and horizontal. So what I see in Egypt, three areas that I know reasonably well. So, one of them is logistics. So in Egypt, for example, the Suez Canal project, which is live now, that's something that's been talked about for 20 or 30 years. Now the government is making it become a reality. They also talk about making Egypt the hub for North Africa, from Europe into North Africa and the rest of Africa. That's something that can be worked on. And also, from a logistics point of view, the post office. The post offices around the world are under immense pressure. The mail volume's dropping, and that's been replaced by the internet parcel shopping phenomenon delivering to houses, right? So we need to focus on that to make sure that government-led divisions are not losing money. Secondly, tourism. I've been coming to Egypt for over 30 years. There's great things here. I did my first diving here and everything else. But I have a house in El Gouna in Hurghada, right? I see a lot of people there, and some of my colleagues are talking about it. Why don't we drive a health tourism? Why don't we get people who want to come with a lot of money from Europe to retire in a place like Egypt? They bring a lot of capital, and they bring a lot of potential investment. And then the third thing is the invisible imports and exports, the overseas Egyptians. I made a big investment personally in Egypt because I married an Egyptian. So, and I'm still waiting to see the return, but I'm sure it's going to come. But when you're overseas and you meet Egyptians, they're fantastic. They're funny. They're very involved and they're very patriotic. So, I think a way of merging all that together and promoting those people to send money back to Egypt and do three things on all those things. Invest in Egypt, trade with Egypt, and visit Egypt. And I think all those are on the table for us to really drive and make a success.
When we were communicating before the conference began, you sent me an email in which you used a phrase which I wanted to raise with you, and I think you've just answered the question. You said, for you, it's very much about an emotional engagement with Egypt, and you seem to have answered that question. You want to expand?
Yeah. So my business philosophy is all about focus. Like I say, I think diversification is a great theory, but in practice it's very difficult. And in fact, just one quickly on that. If you look at the GDP per capita, the biggest ones in the world are not diversified economies. They're very narrow, like Norway, Luxembourg, Qatar, even Switzerland, Australia, Germany. They're not as broadly diversified. So diversification brings a lot of risk. But then I think the second piece is, and I think this conference so far has been brilliant. I mean, what we heard yesterday, particularly from the Americans, the great contributions from the Gulf. What we need now is an emotional attachment right through Egypt, right? It's easy for people in this room to understand what a vision is. It's easy for people in this room to get very excited. What we need to do now is take that message to every single Egyptian in this country, tell them that things are changing, tell them that there is a future. And I think, it's like in business, you have to have a very clear but practical vision. So the vision is clear to the guy in the board, and it's also clear to the guy who's delivering the shipment. And I think that emotional bonding and that emotional engagement is what's going to make this really successful.
Don't forget on Twitter, it's @EgyptTheFuture. We've only got 25 minutes left, and if we can, we'll try to fill the last few minutes with your questions to the panel. Ken Jacobs, Ken here mentioned the Egyptians living abroad that send money back home. I spoke to an Egyptian professor before I came out here, and he said 5 million Egyptians depend on foreign remittances. Is that in itself an example of lack of opportunity here and the lack of diversification? How would you sort of translate that figure?
That may be a phenomena of just the last 5 years or so, and some of the issues that Egypt has undergone during that period of time. Always in emerging countries, there's populations that are abroad that are sending remittances back. That's a healthy thing. It's a form of capital and investment back into countries, and it shouldn't be discouraged. I think what should be captured with it, which I think Ken hit right on the head, is the passion, the intellectual capital that may have moved abroad, and to try to capture that, that's a big source of innovation and intellectual capital.
Ahmed Abdul Karim, when you do business in Egypt, what do you want from the government? Do you want to work with the government? Do you appreciate its regulation of your industry? Or would you prefer almost to be left alone to do the business the way you want to do it with any particular potential private sector partners in Egypt?
Our experience in Egypt with the government has been very successful. We have had very good cooperation and support over the last 7 years. Going forward, because the telecom sector itself is transforming drastically, you have the digital impact, you have the smart cities and smart government initiative, you have the smart enterprise and the smart homes. So everything is being digitized. So telecom and ICT is the main enabler for all of these adjacent opportunities and economies. Going forward, I think the government has to play a different role. When the telecom sector globally was regulated, that was started back in the late 80s, it was very much controlled regulation. Today, you need a different type of regulation. You need regulation to incentivize investment. You need regulation to create jobs in the country. You need regulation to ensure sustainable investment and development in the country. And you need regulation for investors to make money so that they can reinvest it again into the economy. This is the new regulation which is required in Egypt and most of the countries in the world.
Amazingly, I'm sitting so close to you and I can't hear you that well because one of my ears is blocked with the director talking to me. Did you say the word education, did you? Yes, okay. So Martin, human capital.
Yeah.
The critical element for any economy, surely.
Sure. Well, let me just come back, because I caught your eye.
Oh, you were indicating to me,
and maybe to introduce a little bit of disagreement. Diversification actually lessens risk, at least theoretically. It doesn't increase. Specialization increases risk. And I would have thought there's a strong argument for diversification, both, again, coming back to what I said originally, at a macro level in government policy and a micro level in terms of entrepreneurial response. And what Ken was saying was, and both Kens actually, talked about the soft side, because there's a soft side of infrastructure as well as the hard side, and there's the soft side to this whole thing. And our business is about building brands, not only corporate brands or product brands or service brands, but state brands too, state branding. And Brand Egypt, actually in the research that we've done, and we do continual research on at least 60 or 70 countries around the world, Brand Egypt, you would have thought would have been under pressure in the last few years, but actually the research that we have seen starts to indicate that Brand Egypt is strengthening in many parts, for example, of Europe. And I think coming back to Ken Allen's point about the hub that Egypt offers, if you think about the brand for a minute, what are the attributes? There are the attributes of energy and tourism and other things, whether it's healthcare, tourism, whatever. But essentially, what Egypt might be is the hub not just for Africa, but for the Middle East too. It represents the largest country in the Middle East, population terms, the second largest in Africa, and therefore is really very potent and powerful. And even in Italy, we do work with the Italian government and with the mayor of Rome, and they've talked for years about Italy being the entrepot into Africa, North Africa, including Egypt. Now, on this question of human capital, I think the job for the government is quite a difficult one. I was talking to a quite jaundiced, not you, but a quite jaundiced Western journalist, and even he had to admit that this conference has stimulated. He went back to his hotel last night and saw the staff of the hotel group round a television set watching the President Sisi make a speech and becoming very emotionally involved and raising levels of expectation. So the good news is that people are engaged by this conference, and I hope it will become a regular event, but also it raises expectations levels. To deal with that, I think the government has to move fast, as we heard in earlier sessions today, eliminating red tape and bureaucracy as quickly as they possibly can. But they also have to, I think that makes the task even more difficult. And it's a primary task, agriculture. It's a secondary task, manufacturing. And to your point, it's a tertiary task, service industries. If you watch the Minister of Finance presentation, the 12 pillars, the service sector by 2030 is going to be 70% of activity. This mirrors what we see, as we know, in China. I know it's the 12th five-year plan, so we've been at it for 60 years, but the 12th five-year plan talks about service industries. That's the third limb. It's consumption, healthcare safety net, and service industries. And the role of the service industry loops back to the point that I made. In order to engage the male population that's unemployed or underemployed, in order to engage the female population, and indeed the youth, it's absolutely critical to develop the service industries. And we, of course, we have 500 people here, mainly in Cairo. We've been here, I think J. Walter Thompson Company has been here actually since 1924, would you believe it, in one way or another. Had to discontinue in the Second World War, but came back afterwards. So there's a strong sort of marketing, communications, fraternity and sorority here in Egypt, which can be built upon. But service industries and the development of human capital, absolutely critical. And it loops back again to education, which, by the way, the Chinese, I think, if I look at our experience in Shanghai, for example, China is now our third largest market. We work with the municipality of Shanghai to start an advertising and communications school. Would never have happened in the West. It was up and running within 18 months. We had a campus, and we are now in our third year, and we have students that we have first rights over in terms of employing them coming out of the school, schooled in advertising and communications.
Gentlemen, if you could all think possibly, I think between you, you probably all cover the entire globe. If you could, in a moment, because I'm going to ask Ken a question in between this, but just try to think of some comparable economies that Egypt could learn from in terms of being good lessons in diversification. Ken, married to an Egyptian, started your career with DHL as Middle East Regional Manager. And when you look at Egypt today, which sectors do you see as possibly being particularly fruitful for expansion or for new development?
Well, I think like I was saying before, I think there's so many opportunities. We've heard about it over the last couple of days. I think the real interesting thing about the statements yesterday, the United States is right behind the government and the people of Egypt. the Saudis, the Kuwaitis, the UAEs are going to invest the money, which is, is a great backup. And everybody else absolutely supports the economy. So I think the stability piece, hopefully, is never behind you, right? But we've got stability in the economy, right? What we really need now is to build the economy, because what business and what every citizen wants is economic growth after the stability has obviously been there, right? So, for example, I just think there is so much opportunity in every single field that we're already in. So if you take tourism, like I said, I think there's massive potential for health and for older people. And, there's nothing wrong with bringing in wealthy people from Europe to live in a great climate and to get great health care, right? Where we live in Elguna, the infrastructure and the health care is fantastic. But I also think, somebody else was saying to me the other day, right, if the pyramids were in the United States, it'd be like Disneyland times 2, right? So we've got great opportunity within Egypt, to really make the most of what we've already got. I remember 10, 15 years ago when the Tutankhamun exhibition went around the world. I mean, the whole world was stimulated, museums and everywhere were selling out. There's great things that Egypt's got available. Even when I lived in Egypt, I went to the pyramids of Giza, they're great, but the Saqqara pyramid down the road is just as interesting, right? And yet, it doesn't get pushed as much. So when I talk about specialization, yes, you have a diversified economy, but everybody in each individual piece should be absolutely specialized and driving that. I think this whole idea of the hub for North Africa. We at DHL, we've opened a facility on Cairo Airport. It's a 500 million Egyptian pound investment. It is state of the art. If you go around the whole DHL network and look at what we've built on Cairo Hub, you won't find anything else better in the rest of the world. Now what we want to do is get warehousing capability right next to it, make sure that that's a bonded warehouse on airport. We fly one of our planes into Cairo once a week at the moment, or once or twice a week. We want to increase that frequency. And then we also want to bring eventually a plane in from Europe. But then, we need 24 hours customs clearances and all those other things that can really drive it forward. And I think if you look at every single opportunity in that level of detail and you allocate responsibility, because I think the main thing, everybody stood up yesterday and made all those pledges, and everybody's today saying all the things that they're going to do. Well, it's like we're doing business, right? Write it down, make sure that everybody pays back on what they've promised you. So I just think there's so many areas that exist today that we can put that incremental investment into.
Ken Jacobs, can you give us an example of a country that you think Egypt could learn some good lessons from?
There's probably not one country that serves as a perfect model, but if you look at South Korea, Malaysia, two reasonably sized countries that have had good growth dynamics, they did, high government involvement in both countries. In their formative stages, very good job of developing both hard and soft infrastructure. Those are probably two good examples. I think a lot can be learned from the city-states, Singapore, Hong Kong, what China's done with cities, because into the 21st century is going to be dominated by the growth of cities and the efficiencies that come out of growth in cities as opposed to across larger geographic areas. So those are probably some good examples.
Mr. Liu, of all the business that you do in Africa, which are the most diversified economies that you find the best opportunities in which to put Chinese money?
I think for Chinese companies and the diversified conception is maybe different. Because the Chinese companies, when they go abroad, they only rely on their expertise. For example, you can see a lot of people in Africa, they are rushed for the project EPC. But now it's changed because the country's development level give the Chinese guys different opportunities. Now the Chinese people just organize the consortiums. For example, in China, some of the Chinese is from the Chinese enterprises, some is from the investment companies. Now, in Africa, we thought in this continent, the diversified things is how to well match together. This is most important things. just like China 30 years ago, how we cooperate with others. Because at that time, we don't know yet each other, but then with the contacts and with their coming and with our Goa site, we know each other, we know how to cooperate with each other, and then know what we really wanted. This continent and also Egypt, the same. Maybe 9 years ago, I said 6 years ago, I've been here. When they talk to the government levels, they just give you some project there, and then finish. But this time, it's easy to find a minister and find the technical staff, more efficient, very encouraging. I can feel that.
So Martin, let's pick up on the point that you made in your first answer about local entrepreneurs, small, medium-sized enterprises. You're all foreign businessmen who want to do business in Egypt. Would those particular business people here in Egypt not feel threatened by big foreign companies coming in and squeezing them out?
There is a tension there. We work with both, even here in Egypt, with the big multinationals and with local companies. And we try and build our business with both. The big multinationals actually tend to think that their competitive set is the competitive set of multinationals. So, for example, if you're Unilever or Procter & Gamble, you think your competition is one of those two, or Nestle, or Colgate, or Kraft, or Mondelez, or whatever it happens to be. Actually, in our experience, the real competitive battle, for example, in China, is not between the multinationals. It might be at corporate headquarters, but in the trenches, it's with the local companies and the regional companies. That's where, so for example, in China, the multinationals have strong consumer loyalty but little awareness. The Chinese companies have strong awareness and very strong distribution, which is very critical in first, second, third, fourth tier cities. There are 184 cities in China with more than 1 million people. So awareness and distribution is key, and the Chinese brands are trying to build their brands and their price premia by getting greater loyalty. So there's that aspect. But I just want to come back to one other thing, which is this conference, all the sessions I've heard today, I wasn't here yesterday, have been really the seller, that's Egypt, trying to sell its services hard or sell its attraction and brand hard. I think actually the buyers are very ripe. And the reason I say that is you have here a market of 90 million people, 90 million plus. If I look at the historical examples, and I've been trying to run WPP for 30 years, the countries that I would highlight as being comparables would be Vietnam. We as a British-owned company actually went into Vietnam faster than our American competitors because we were allowed to do so. Myanmar, so Vietnam is now 85 million people, so very similar in market size to Egypt. Myanmar, 60 million people, 63 million I think it is. Again, we've gone in there very rapidly after sanctions were lifted. So if you think about it that way for a minute, it's really a seller's market. Buyers are under pressure because worldwide growth, GDP growth, is slower than we would like. As a result, emphasis on costs and management of costs because of very little pricing power with very little inflation. So the buyers, the foreign direct investors, whether it be American companies, British companies, Chinese, French, German, Italian, Spanish, are looking for market expansions and market openings very aggressively. And any country in which they could get 7% GDP growth, we would cut our limbs off in the UK and the US to get 7%. And so I think you've got to look at it a little bit the other way, but you're right. The heart of your question is right. There is this innate competition. And I think for the local entrepreneurs, and Egypt has a tremendous reputation and history in terms of trading and entrepreneurial activity, is a very powerful opportunity for companies to build diverse operations in Egypt. And then as the foreign competition comes in, they can pick those activities that they feel most comfortable and invest in those activities and develop them, not just in Egypt, not just in the region, but globally.
Okay, just about 6 minutes left. At Egypt, the future is the Twitter address. Apparently, at egyptthefuture.com will also appear here on my tablet if you have any questions. Okay, Ahmed Abdul Karim. So, can you, if you're able to, because obviously there's certain confidences in the business world, tell us about some deals that you're hoping to achieve here that you may be in negotiations with the Egyptian government? Or if you can't, can you give us an example of where you've gone into a country and been able to do a business which you feel has been of benefit to that country? We already understand that increased telecommunications will inevitably lead to greater diversification.
There is a major initiative in Egypt, which is to connect everybody in Egypt on the broadband network. It's a huge initiative by the government. Today, the telecom industry in Egypt makes about 3% of the GDP of the country. According to their ICT strategy, it should make an impressive 8.4% in 2020. Now, we have been successful in the UAE. The telecom operators, excuse me, have invested 100% in the infrastructure to connect up to 90% of the homes in the UAE with fiber. That is a model can be replicated in Egypt. I think with what I heard yesterday and today, with the openness of mind, with the plans which coming from the top of the pyramid in Egypt, all the way down to the ministries, to the regulation, there is a big intention and a huge will to achieve something soon. So it all depends on implementation and execution. That model can be replicated in Egypt. The will is there. We have seen Egyptian, when we have launched our network here and services 7 years ago, 98% of the team was Egyptian and still Egyptian. So you have great people here, great entrepreneurs in this country, and I think they can achieve it again in the future.
Okay, I was going to ask you about new energy resources, because clearly someone will have to fund President Sisi's announcement last year that there was going to be a massive injection of investment into solar energy as an alternative energy resource. We probably haven't got time to get into it. So let's end with a few, if we possibly can, all of you just maybe in 30, 40 seconds. Let's start with you, Ken, because I saw you making some notes. Presumably it was something to do with what we're talking about, I hope.
Well, I just think as well that everything that's going to be done over the next years to come, right, is not just necessarily big mega projects, right? You know, so some of the things that we're working on, right, is, you know, how do we promote Egypt on our, you know, every week we send millions of shipments around the world, and one of the things that we were thinking about, right, is on all our shipments, you know, to do things, you know, visit Egypt, trade with Egypt, and invest in Egypt. So simple things like that. We are in every country in the world except Turkmenistan, right? So we can help promote Egypt anywhere. And also, for example, in the UK, David Cameron's government wants to double exports. We're working with the government to, you know, achieve that goal, because we can provide a lot of information to small and medium-sized customers. How do you deal with customs regulations? What kind of paperwork requirements do you need? And I think we really can help Egypt achieve all its export goal orientations, right? Also, we do a lot of events worldwide, and sometimes with government where they want to promote Egypt in Canada, in Europe, or where their export markets are. At our expense, you know, we'll produce a booth that sells Egypt around the world. And to my point about the Egyptians overseas, which I think is a huge untapped potential, right? You know, we can work, if the government wants us to, with embassies overseas to get those people together to tell them about what's going on in Egypt. And then I suppose, you know, finally myself, I'm going to invest in Egypt. I'm going to look at the property. I'm looking to buy a business. You know, any of those bonds that come up, we'll be buying more, you know, to put investment into the company. I think the stock market is going to be a great opportunity. So personally, I'm going to do it as well.
Okay. And Okay, apparently the conversation is going so well that they've given us another 15 minutes, so that won't be a concluding statement. But Ken, thanks very much. Okay, let's actually then discuss this issue of, because it's part of diversification, it's about finding new energy resources. So the question is, where's the money going to come from? If it's going to be FDI, foreign direct investment, Ken Jacobs, do you see any reason why foreign, whoever they may be, governments, private enterprises, like the China African Development Fund, should have any reasons or any concerns about putting their money into Egypt?
Well, the key thing now, assuming we're all right about the enthusiasm and the opportunity, which I think we are, is about the implementation. And the implementation really comes down to a couple of things. One is everything we're talking about here involves some form of public and private partnership. So knowing what the rules of the road are is quite important. What's the process? How do you get things done? What's the mechanism for disputes, resolving disputes? So kind of coming up with a framework for getting the money in an efficient and timely manner is important. Second is just the ability to prioritize. There's so many things that are being talked about right now that you need to prioritize. Okay, what are we doing and what do we want to accomplish day one? What is it we want to accomplish over the first year? What is it we need to accomplish over the first 5 years? Sort of putting these things into buckets and then in effect having a high degree of focus on the things that have to happen quickly is very important.
Liu Hao, I understand you don't speak for the Chinese people or indeed for the government, but if we're talking about diversification helping a country actually improve and expand its export markets, there's the example here in Egypt would be Coca-Cola that exports to 40 countries from Egypt. And it's going to be investing $500 million to build a new factory here in Egypt, so that will obviously help the economy. In China, Walmart, since Walmart opened in China, its exports from China have gone through the roof. So how does Egypt find new export markets? Traditionally, it's been the European Union and the Gulf states, which have been this country's most important trading partners. Is China perhaps ready to receive Egyptian products? Can it be an export market for Egypt?
Yes, and very good question. That's why I'm here, because last December, the Excellency President Sisi in China, they talk about the CATFAC. And next month, our excellent President will be here. That's why I'm here. And talking about how to develop this, we call it outside-oriented project. In China, in the past, we just offer some projects, just like some light material, the clothing, let Hong Kong guys come to the Guangdong and produce, and then they sell out to the European and to the US. This way is most beneficial is they solve the problem of employment, and then they attract the money from the outside. The third is they just send this kind of a product to the other countries and earn the foreign currencies. And in the 30 years ago in China, we lack of foreign currencies. RMB is not stable and quite devalued, and we try to absorb and obtain more foreign currencies to stable the currency. This is most important. And now our project, Chinese project in Egypt, is also face the same programs. The Egypt bond, and they can earn money from that, but they cannot take money dominating US dollars. So this is a very current situation. The most important thing is how to develop the whole country economy and how to lead the people, no matter Chinese guys, European guys, to come here for the projects which is needed by the local or by the overseas product. For example, we have financed CDB, have financed a glass fiber project. 90% now, 90% sell out to European countries. But the local currencies, for them, it doesn't matter. They can pay the money for the local employment. So this is a very matched. So I just discussed my colleagues, and later we'll discuss the Minister of Investment of Egypt, how to figure out this kind of projects as top priority. And also another things I want to mention is in China, very successful practice is the overall planning, no matter 5 years, 3 years, or 10 or 2 years. Let the guys outside know what exactly government want to do. And then what's the allocation to the different ministries. And then we should find the right people to write things. Thank you.
You're just highlighting clarity there at the end, that everybody wants to know that they're on the same page and they understand the rules perfectly well. Otherwise, it may stop them from taking a certain risk.
Yes, one word I want to add is yesterday the ex-President Sisi mentioned the 3 axes. One is the stability. The second is improved environment by the legislative measure. The third is execution of the projects in the view of the governmental one. Very encouraging.
Ahmed Abdul Karim, speak to us from outside your area of expertise and tell us about the Gulf, and if this country achieves the diversified economy that it eventually would like to, even though we've all agreed that it's already extremely diversified as an example to other Middle Eastern states, would the Gulf be a good market for Egyptian exports? Can you see any particular problem with sending those products to the Gulf? Is the willingness there of the customer to take them?
Throughout history, the Gulf has been a good importer of Egyptian products. Now I think Egyptian products have to compete with international products, especially in terms of quality, because Gulf customers are a bit focused more on quality than prices. But I want to jump to another subject, again, outside my industry. The UAE, every year, they receive millions of visitors and tourists, and the number is more than the number Egypt receives. And in the UAE, we don't have the pyramids, we don't have the Nile, we don't have the heritage that Egypt has, we don't have Sharm el-Sheikh, we don't have all of these fantastic attractions. So this is a sector which has huge potential in Egypt, unbelievable potential. I mean, this can multiple in few years. It requires the right focus and the right service industry around it, and it will be, I think, by far, the biggest contributor to the Egyptian GDP and the Egyptian economy. It's an area where you cannot find it in many countries, and the location of Egypt makes it even much attractive. This is, I think, an industry which can exponentially grow over the next 5 to 10 years.
Every single person that talks about the Egyptian economy, Ken said it, you've said it, tourism, right? Tourism. Again, this professor that I was speaking about earlier, an Egyptian professor in London who I spoke to before coming here, 10 million Egyptians, he said, depend on income from tourism. And I'm sure that all of you, whenever that word is mentioned, you think of another word as well. And that word is, Sir Martin, security. So they go hand in hand, of course, and the economy and security go hand in hand.
To be fair, I mean, Egyptian tourism has recovered already quite significantly, not to the levels that we see elsewhere, but has recovered. Come back to this issue of security that you mentioned. I mean, if you want to be optimistic, which I think we all do, there are the sort of seeds of optimism in a troubled region starting to emerge. If you see what's happening here, obviously, around this conference, and the policy that the government outlined this morning and has announced historically, if you look at the growth of our business in Saudi, for example, or Dubai, or Abu Dhabi, I mean, in the old days, it was very much Beirut and Lebanon that dominated our Middle Eastern business. If we went back 20 or 30 years, that is no longer the case as the business has shifted to Dubai, Abu Dhabi, and now latterly into Saudi. So Egypt, Saudi, and then the other big economic opportunity, although there are tremendous geopolitical questions surrounding it, is Iran, where you have another 63 million people, 60 million, it's about the size of Myanmar, highly educated, highly literate population, even higher than other countries in the region, which could, or may not, but could open up as well. So you do see the stirrings, I think. You're thinking about it from from the position of somebody who's trying to run, like our clients are, a multinational business. You see challenges in Latin America. You see challenges in Eastern Europe. There are some challenges in Asia, clearly, but very big opportunities, so not underplaying that. But Africa and the Middle East, and with Egypt being a bridge, as we've discussed, between the two, I think you can start to build a sort of quite cogent case for increased investment, not just in Egypt, but in other countries' regions. Having said that, there are a lot of problems. I don't want to sort of sweep them under the rug. There are a lot of what we call black swans, potential black swans, and indeed grey swans. Those are known unknowns that are swimming around or flapping around. But I do think there are significant reasons for increased optimism. And coming back to the question of security, the phrase was used in this morning's session about economic security. What economic growth gives you is economic security. That's the way to deal with social unrest or potential social unrest. That's the way to deal with youth unemployment and concern about levels of poverty and inequality and the like.
Okay, so now you can all see the clock that the audience can't. 4 minutes. Ken, you've already had your closing thoughts. Let's have yours, Ken Jacobs.
I would come back to this point I made earlier, which is at this point it's about execution and making sure that the initiatives that have been laid out here over the last day or so and continue to be discussed over the next day or so get implemented. And a lot of that comes down to, again, this whole issue of prioritization and making sure that there's focus on things that can get done and that people know what the rules are and who to turn to. And then with regard to the private-public partnerships, they have to be structured in a way where they can be implemented in a timely basis, but most importantly in a way where if it works for the private sector, it very importantly works for the public sector as well, so that everybody feels like a success is a success for everyone.
Ahmed Abdul Karim.
Today, the highest market cap companies in the world are digital companies, Apple and Google. And they both come from Silicon Valley. Egypt has an opportunity to build the Silicon Valley of the region. There's so much appetite and investment available to invest in this sector, and we have seen it today and yesterday, to invest in Egypt. Egypt has 65% or 67% of the people under 30 years old. They are very much tech-savvy people, very smart people, very intelligent people. And for the Arab region, it will be the center because Egypt is the heart of the Arab region. So it is the greatest opportunity for Egypt to diversify their economy, to create hundreds of thousands of jobs, and it is a very innovative industry that Egypt can go in.
Maybe the key point there was diversification creates jobs. Liu Hao.
Thank you. CDB and the CAT Fund have done something here in Egypt, and we will do more because this good country has good diplomatic ties with China, my country, and also yesterday's conference, I saw the unity of this country and this region. The second is, in the future, you mentioned some other, my colleagues, my people here mentioned a lot of advancement. I believe that this is really some advantage. We want to share and want to, with our help, no matter is the capital injection or the financing of our bank and our Chinese financier. And I do believe this country with the new government will improve their efficiency. They will do much more for the livelihood and the people. This is something done in China. The third is we will go with Egypt together, go far and go fast. Thank you.
Sir Martin?
Well, two things. Being tail end Charlie, it's all been said before, but just come back. That cynical journalist that I mentioned said to me, we've been here in Egypt before at this point. We've had a government that has expressed a view of change. The change that was achieved was not necessarily in the right direction. So Ken J, as opposed to Ken A, you can have a strategy. And remember the business school debates about whether implementation was more important than strategy or vice versa. And the answer is it's both. But we've got a clear strategy, so the question is implementation. So that's one thing. The second thing is just pick up on the point about digital. It's amazing what Israel has done with 7 million people, acknowledging a lot of Russian emigres have come in and PhDs. But can you imagine what a population of 90 million people, 2/3 of whom are under 30 and who are very socially savvy, just look at the Facebook statistics just for it. Can you imagine what they might be able to do in creating a new economy and the diversity in employment that we're all talking about?
Ladies and gentlemen, there are sectoral sessions taking place right now. The next session in this room will be at 5:30, 17:30. It'll be the Global Investor Perspective, but I'm sure you'll join me in thanking your Economic Diversification panel. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen.